According to the Associated Press, every presidential race since the radio was invented, save the 2000 Bush-Gore debacle, we've known the winner by the end of Election Day. But this year it's probably going to be more like election week or even election month, with some mail-in ballots trickling in for days after the traditional polls close, and cities and towns processing an unprecedented number of early votes that many aren't allowed to even touch until next Tuesday. And as Trump and his team have said time and time again, they're not on board with any of it.
The Democrats are trying to rig this election.
There is no way you can go through a mail-in vote without massive cheating. Mail-in ballots will lead to the greatest fraud.
What we want election night to look like is a system that's fair, a situation where we know who the president of the United States is on election night. That's how the system is supposed to work.
It would be very, very proper and very nice if a winner were declared on November 3rd instead of counting ballots for 2 weeks, which is totally inappropriate, and I don't believe that that's by our laws.
Of course, that couldn't be more incorrect. In fact, while news organizations have almost always declared a winner on election night, the official legal results always come much later, after every single vote is counted and the Electoral College meets for its vote in December. And as for mail-in voting, the president's own FBI director has repeatedly stressed that there's no evidence of any major fraud in any national elections by mail or otherwise. So why is the president insisting on immediate results? Maybe it's because most Trump supporters, around 87%, have indicated they plan to vote in person on Election Day, meaning their ballots will be counted quickly, while a majority of Biden supporters, around 53%, said they plan to cast their ballots by mail, which could be counted more slowly. That means there's a possibility that Trump could be leading at midnight on November 3rd. That's the so-called red mirage, yet still end up with fewer votes than Joe Biden once all ballots are tallied, the so-called blue shift, a scenario it seems the president is more than ready to exploit. So if we do end up with a red mirage come Tuesday and Trump declares he's the winner and that any votes that are counted later are faked, are illegal, how will the media and the voters themselves handle it? Joining me with the answers, I hope, are Amber McReynolds. Amber's the CEO of the National Vote at Home Institute and a member of the bipartisan National Task Force on Election Crises. Brian Stelter is CNN's chief media correspondent, host of Reliable Sources, and the author of a terrific book, Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Brian, we talk on the radio every week with your buddy, your colleague, John King, about alerting the public to an unusual November 3rd. You put out your own to-do list for the press on your newsletter late last night. I think it was last night. It may have been the night before. But are newsrooms adequately preparing, large and small newsrooms, adequately preparing the public for a possible premature declaration of victory?
They are, but there's a lot more to be done in the next few days because some people, some voters are just tuning in now for the first time. So we cannot stress enough the importance of patience, the possibilities that this could take a very long time, but there's a wide range of scenarios. It may be that by 11 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday the 3rd, we may have a very clear sense of who the next president is. However, it's also possible we won't know for several days. The idea that we need to emphasize in the press is that a wide variety of scenarios are possible. None of them indicate fraud. None of them indicate the kind of illegality the president's alleging. And what he's really trying to do is create confusion. We have to be the antidote to that.
Do you not worry, though, that despite the best intention of your media colleagues, and I include myself in this category, we may be a little late to the fair? Donald Trump has been grooming the public for months and months and months for exactly the scenario that I described a minute ago. He's ahead of the game, no?
I am greatly concerned. I agree with you. He's been doing this for months, and there hasn't been a lot of awareness of it outside of the pro-Trump media and his own base. If you've been listening closely to the president, he has been sowing these seeds of doubt, actually for years. He did this before the 2016 election. You know what he did on Election Day in 2016, assuming he was going to lose? He called into Fox and started making excuses for a rigged election. And we're going to see the exact same thing happen in the next few days.
So, Amber, in addition to being head of the National Vote at Home Institute, which we'll talk about in a minute, you were also on the board of the National Task Force on Election Crises, a title that seems redundant to me, actually, but that's for another day. One of the issues on your agenda there is the press doing what Brian and I were just talking about. As a non-media person, do you think the press is doing an adequate job of preparing the public?
Well, I think we definitely need to do more leading into Tuesday, and I think it'd be great for the national press to talk extensively about this over the next week. And what I would also encourage the press to do is to rely on experts that have actually run elections. I myself ran elections for 13 years, served as director of elections in Denver. So I actually know about the back end process, how ballots are counted, how they're processed, when they're processed in every state, and what that looks like. And what I think that the media hasn't covered yet is that the significant number of early voters, we're likely going to be close to 100 million by the end of the week, based on the trend that's happening now. We've never had that many ballots cast prior to Election Day. And in most states, those are actually going to be processed before Tuesday. So when they post results, mail-in and early votes are going to be first, followed by in-person voting that will be processed after polls are closed. So they can't start transferring those tallies and transferring that data into the main offices until the polls are closed. So this is going to be a long night.
I want to talk to you about the processing and the pre-processing in a minute, but in your capacity as head of the National Vote at Home Institute, it's not just the president who has been talking about how mail-in ballot is fatally flawed, but his attorney general. Here is Bill Barr, actually on CNN, with Wolf Blitzer in early September.
This is playing with fire. We're a very closely divided country here. People trying to change the rules to this methodology, which, as a matter of logic, is very open to fraud and coercion, is reckless and dangerous. And people are playing with fire.
And by the way, when he's asked about what the fraud is, he picks an example which actually is not true. But putting that aside for a minute, it seems to me the good news in this big mess is that not only has the fear tactic of the president and his attorney general not scared people away. You mentioned, there could be 100 million early votes. If anything, it seems to have encouraged people, inspired them to stand in lines in the rain for hours and do this mail-in thing. It's had the reverse impact, has it not?
I think it has. I think people have acted earlier this year because people have made decisions earlier in this election cycle. And frankly, there's no changing of the rules. Every single state has had vote by mail going all the way back to the Civil War. There's been procedures in place for decades that have expanded it greatly in red and blue states. So the fact is, it's just not a new concept. Yes, some things have changed in the last few years, but every state has had vote by mail going back to the Civil War.
Amber, I want to stay with you for 1 second. You mentioned this processing thing, and actually I'm much more nervous about it than you are, because it seems to me another possible scenario is in a close state like Florida, where they are pre-processing, even though not counting. Donald Trump has a really good chance of winning. And then in the states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where they're not pre-processing, where he has a real good chance of losing, he can say, Florida counted their mail-in votes quickly. Those are legit. What's taken Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin so long unless they're messing with the ballots? That's a pretty credible argument from a guy like Donald Trump, no?
Well, so all three of the states you mentioned are in the minority in terms of pre-processing. There's really only a handful of states that do not process till Election Day. Michigan expanded it to the day before, so Michigan is going to get a good head start before Election Day. However, what I would also point out is there's actually been proposals in front of all of these three legislatures, and election officials of all party stripes have encouraged all three of those state legislative bodies for more than 6 months to expand the pre-processing window. And the Republican legislatures in all of those states have rejected any conversation around that. And so,
right, and they get the
if
final
we want to
word
talk about why those three states are going to be behind, it is really at the feet of the policymakers in those states that have refused to act.
Right. Getting back to you, Brian, in your to-do list last night, what else should the press be doing in addition, the media be doing in addition to preparing people for a long set of nights in early November?
I think demystifying the decision desk process is related to this conversation. The decision desks at the broadcast networks, CNN, Fox, and the AP are the ones that do project races and declare winners in the case of the AP. And that is oftentimes based on exit poll data, other types of data before every single ballot is cast. Now, we're going to see the decision desks be extremely cautious and careful. But I think it's important for the viewers at home to know how this process works and how it is mathematical. It's not magic, it's math, as the head of the AP recently said to me. When it comes down to these states where there could be a red mirage, or there could be, one set of data that really clearly favors one of the candidates, not the other, there will be an incredible amount of caution. But I think we need to explain that to the audience at home. The John Kings of the world will be explaining that in real time on Tuesday night.
One more thing, though, from that newsletter, I think it was from that ungodly hour that you put this thing out, which is why I'm confusing the nights. I mean, it's great, but it is an odd hour. You quote somebody, I think, from Politico, who talks about how a lot of the media is overcorrecting in 2020 for 2016, predicting Trump had no chance. And he goes on to say, maybe that's a good thing. But my response to that is that fosters a false sense of closeness if the polls are correct, which feeds into Trump's argument that he wins on November 3rd if he's ahead because of the in-person voting, no?
Right. It creates it creates this sense, and not a real sense, but an idea that he could have prevailed. Look, I am very concerned about that. I do think the news coverage right now makes the race seem closer than it is. CNN just today dropped a new poll, Biden ahead by 12 among likely voters. These are numbers Hillary Clinton was never seen in 2016. I know a lot of Democrats have PTSD and don't want to believe the polls and don't want to believe Biden has a chance of winning. But if we were to run a simulation of this election right now, Biden would win 9 out of 10 times. So that reality is important to recognize. The press should not overcorrect. We should correct, not overcorrect. And you're making an important point about the narrative Trump is trying to sell, that most people are not buying, but that his base is buying, that the only way he can win is if Biden cheats. And I hope, as I've hoped for the last 4 years, that ethical Republicans will stand up to those kinds of lies if those lies are indeed shared by the president next week.
And I hope that I'm a billionaire tomorrow morning, by the way. Amber, before we go, we only have a minute left here. One of the very few good things that's come out of a pandemic is that what you've been the guru of for ages, expanded voting options, have exploded. Are you convinced that these will outlast the pandemic, or are they here now and disappearing tomorrow? Quickly, if you can.
They're absolutely going to outlast, and the reason for that is vote by mail and early voting has been expanding for 2 decades prior to the pandemic. And if you compare it to Amazon and delivery and Lyft and Uber and all of these other services that consumers are grabbing onto, people want services that meet them where they are in their everyday lives. And vote by mail gets to that piece. It expands convenience, and so voters are going to gravitate towards it, just like they have been for the last 2 decades.
I hope you're right. Amber McReynolds, good to meet you. Brian Stelter.